In the Stoic Week Handbook for 2015, they give you these noontime meditations with some really helpful suggestions for thinking things through, exercises, you might say. And the exercise for day one is runs like this. Take a few minutes to think about the qualities you've come to value in the course of your life, however young or old you are. Have you changed your ideas about what is most important in the course of your life as your situation has changed? Do you think your ideas have deepened on this topic over time or not? And then it goes on, think too about the people who have helped you appreciate the importance of these qualities and what qualities or ways of life they've led you to value. They might be family members, close friends or partners, work associates, or people you do not know directly, but whom you respect and admire. And it suggests you might like to make notes or pictures on this and to chart things out. That's what I'm doing here in this video. I'm carrying out some reactions and reflections every single day over the course of Stoic Week. I'm somebody who's been studying Stoicism for quite some time, but like anything philosophical, you never really get to the absolute bottom of it. You never exhaust it. There's always more to learn. So I'm really happy to have this exercise to engage with. So, have my values, have the qualities that I value in myself and others changed over time? Yes, considerably. And I'm a happier person for it, and I'm quite a different person because of it. The first thing that came to mind as I was reflecting on this is, when I was in, my teen years and well through my 20s, I was somewhat of what you might call a hothead and a tough guy. Actually, a lot of the work that I do with anger still stems from my interest in figuring out what the hell was wrong with me and what the hell was wrong with other people in the world that made me such an anger-prone person. But it wasn't just anger; it was also the Greeks call it philonikia, this wanting not to be so much right, but wanting to be on top, wanting to be the one who's acknowledged as being the best, being right. Competitiveness, we could call it. And I was very competitive, in part because, it was connected up with issues of right and wrong and what I thought was just and unjust. Oftentimes I was quite off base about those sorts of things, and occasionally I still am. In my own life today, as I find out through bitter experience, but I would get involved in activities, and I always wanted to be, on top. I always wanted to be number one, and that led to quite a bit of insecurity and bitterness on my part because it's not possible. I was very fortunate in that I was gifted intellectually. So, and I had a set of adoptive parents who really took a lot of time and effort to help me develop intellectually. Not quite so much in figuring out the psychological aspects of how to deal with the fact that you're running on all eight cylinders while the school is only running on one, or that sort of thing, or how to fit in. But when I would get tested as a kid, I was off the charts. And I started reading when I was about 3 years old, in part because my mother worked with me. I started doing fairly high-level mathematics for a kid by the time that I was 4 and 5, because my dad worked with me. And so, I could get ahead very easily in that. I don't know that I valued it quite so much because it was more in the areas where there was a wider, field that I would compete against that I saw that as more valuable. And I'm not quite sure exactly where I picked it up. It might be from our culture. It might be from just the way I grew up and the environment I grew up in. But, toughness became something very important for me, particularly in the years after my dad had died. I looked to essentially soldiers and warrior types as being my ideal. So, in a certain way, Stoicism, in a misunderstood manner, fit in with that because, when you think about the tough guy, the warrior, the person who is willing to endure a lot, who doesn't, allow their emotions, except perhaps rage every once in a while, to dominate them, who approaches situations in what seems like a problem-solving, rational way. Yeah, that's sort of a truncated version of Stoicism. It actually doesn't fit into the philosophy as a whole. We're reading, or in my case, rereading Marcus Aurelius this week, and he is a great example of a not only a philosopher king, but also a warrior sage. He's somebody who practiced the Stoic life while living in a military manner, leading campaigns that he didn't want to have to do, but he saw as needed for the benefit of the Roman nation, which he was charged with. So, all of that sort of, these sort of two motifs of toughness and competitiveness in my life, they drove me through a lot of what I was doing. I would say that, there was also another motif, which is I was always trying to look for greater meaning, something that made sense out of everything and that I could belong to. And I tried a lot of different things, and sometimes these would coincide. I would say that one example of that is when I joined the U.S. military, and I went in to become a combat engineer with the goal, actually, it sounds very, very silly at this point, of ultimately becoming a mercenary. I thought that sort of life, first of all, being part of, the larger military and defending the West against the East. There was a time of, the Iron Curtain and Warsaw Pact. And then, a life of adventure with good friends. There were other guys involved in this sort of prospect too, all of whom I've lost touch with, except for one who now is a blacksmith. This was for me something that gave meaning. And then I was very disillusioned when it turned out that the military is very different, especially in peacetime, than I was figuring. And then, I ended up going to college someplace I'd never intended to go to. But I think, my mother really wanted me to go. And I was kind of tired after I got out of the military working dead-end jobs. And there, there was the chance to succeed intellectually. And one of the struggles I had for a long time, and for me, fortunately, it's long past, was the kind of competitiveness with the other graduate students and even with young professors, that having some sort of intellectual acuity allowed me to do. I'm not very proud of the way I behaved as a graduate student. I was quite a jerk much of the time, and people put up with a lot of nonsense from me that I don't think they really ought to have. But I'm really glad that they did. I've actually written some of them and apologized and thanked them for some of their guidance that they showed me. So that's a good transition point to thinking about what I value today. I would say that I've come to appreciate the other virtues. If in my earlier life I was much more about courage and temperance, at least in the sense of just self-control over bodily appetites and being able to work out a lot and endure hardship. Now I'm much more about practical wisdom, phronesis, and justice. And I think I thought I was about justice in the past, but I really wasn't at all. There were glimmers. What other people would do. I would sometimes kick against it, but I could recognize the rightness of it. But it wasn't such an important thing for me. I was too driven by these other passions and driven by thinking that you can have some of the virtues without having the rest of the virtues. So as I've gotten older, and as I've encountered and had to work through quite a few setbacks in life, some of them physical, some of them family-wise, some of them career-wise, and deal with various challenges and become much more aware of myself as a finite being whose potential, can go this way or this way, but I can't choose all of them at the same time. I've really come to value practical wisdom, which is, the centerpiece of the virtues, figuring out what is best for us, what is truly best for us, not just what we think at the moment is best for us or what we tell ourselves because the culture pushes that onto us and it's convenient for us, or what's going to get us into a good career track or get us that award or something like that, but what is truly best for us. And I think that in order to exercise prudence, you have to learn to not be, I don't want to say black and white about things, because really things are much of the world is in fact black and white. It's just a chiaroscuro where the little bits look gray because there's black and white and little dots next to each other. But oftentimes we have to be much more flexible. We have to defer our judgments, or we have to be provisional in our judgments and then be willing to revise them as we get better information. As other people say, hey, you're off base here. Why don't you think more about this? We have to be willing to do that, and that requires a kind of openness that is, it's not automatic, especially after we've built up habits of going our own way and not listening to other people. In part, for me, that's made me a better philosopher. Partly by stripping away the wish to do much original on my own part. I have these great thinkers like the Stoics, for example, who I can read and marvel at and incorporate and teach about. And if I just do a good job not screwing them up as I'm portraying them, that's enough for me. I don't need to say anything particularly profound or original on my own part, because I can fit into this, this larger universe, this realm in which we have exposure to the riches of millennia of texts and thinkers, not just in philosophy, but in history and literature. We can't exhaust it in a lifetime. As a matter of fact, that's probably my well, I have a lot of regrets, but that's probably one of my biggest regrets, is how much time I wasted on trivial things rather than rereading Plato or rereading Epictetus or rereading Pascal, and talking about it with other people and teaching about it. So, long entry. I'm going to try to keep these a bit shorter in the future. That's it for today. It's now day 2 of Stoicism week, and I'm looking at the noontime meditation for the day. Day 2, the theme that they picked is the classic Stoic theme of what is in our control or our business and what is not in our control. And the suggestion is take a few minutes to think in a specific way about what this distinction would mean in your own life. You could begin by making 2 lists, one of things in your current life and situation you can control by your own actions and aspirations, and one of things that you cannot control. You could then examine the contents of the 2 lists and think about which of these 2 lists is, on reflection, more important and valuable. And then he asks, how far do your lists match the Stoic distinction between things that are and are not within our power, as summarized by Epictetus, for example? How far does it match the Stoic distinction between virtuous actions and externals or indifference, such as health, property, and social status? So when I'm thinking about that right now, you can hear some of the street noise outside. The building, across the street from our building, there's somebody operating some sort of circular saw, which is making quite a bit of noise, people honking. I find as a content producer, I'm a bit of a perfectionist about wanting my videos to have excellent sound quality, which they almost never really do. So things like that have a tendency to annoy me. But if I apply this distinction to that, I don't really have any control over that environment. The best that I can do is to try to set things up in such a way that I can shoot and that I can get the material out there in a timely manner to people who'd like to see it, and that's about as far as it can go. There's a lot of things that can go wrong. I'll say as well that the technology and the place in which you're shooting are often impediments to you as well, but they don't have to be great impediments, because what's most important, I guess that's what the upshot of this is for me. What do I have control over? I have control over whether I do a video or not. I have control over whether I come to the video well informed and having reflected on what I'm going to say. I have control over whether I allow all these things to, the environment, the acoustics of the place, which I'm still not quite used to, the way the microphone sounds, the way the recording stuff works in terms of Apple products. I don't have to let all of that get to me, because I can concentrate on the parts that I do have control over, whether I'm knowledgeable, whether I communicate effectively, whether I do the work that's required or not. And if I can keep my focus on those things and not allow myself to get too distracted, or in my case, quite often irritated by the things I don't have control over, I'm likely to do two things. One is to do a better job on the video, communicate more effectively, and the other is I'll actually enjoy it more. Sometimes I really enjoy the work that I do. Sometimes not quite so much. I find it an annoyance, or I find it something I have to get through. And ideally, you want to have a job where you're doing what it is that you're well suited for all the time, and actually enjoying it because it uses your talents and your capacities. So, all of that fits in there. I would say another thing, too, that I've been thinking quite a bit about, because I'm doing the Stoic Week event in Milwaukee, which is my hometown originally, but I haven't lived here for 20 years. I'm not sure how many people are going to show up. I'm hoping that I don't have, a tiny audience, because we booked a room that can seat 50 people, and I do want to videotape it, and I want to get some good Q&A. But then when I think about it, I've presented to rooms of 200 people. I've presented to an audience as small as one person showing up to an event. And what really matters is not how many people show up, or even how they react to the event. I don't have any control over that. It's instead what I bring to it, whether I prepare well, whether I create the handout materials in a way that's easy to follow, whether I speak well, particularly given that I'm going to be recording it, whether I talk about Stoicism and how it can improve our lives and lead us to happiness in ways that can reach an audience that isn't just there in that room at that time. On the other hand, I might get surprised and have so many people showing up that they're out the door, and then that's a different kind of thing that tends to make me a bit anxious, because then I have to think about how I'm going to deal with that. But I don't really have to deal with that. That's not my business, so to speak. It's not in my control. Today it's day 3 of Stoic Week, and for the noontime meditation, it is focused today on mindfulness, or essentially paying attention to what's going on with yourself, with your thoughts that you're having, with your emotional responses, what sort of desires and aversions are being activated in Stoic terms. So here's the prompt from the handbook for today. It says, "You've already started monitoring your thoughts, actions, and feelings, and distinguishing between things under your control and not. From this point onward during Stoic Week, try to catch the early warning signs of strong desires or upsetting emotions. Pause to give yourself thinking space and to gain psychological distance from your initial impressions. If your feelings are particularly strong or difficult to deal with, postpone thinking about them any further until you've had a chance to calm down, which may be during your evening meditation. Then, try asking yourself the following 3 questions. Most importantly, ask yourself whether the things that are upsetting you are within your power or not, and if they're not, accept this fact and remind yourself such things are not fundamentally important in the way that virtue is. Second one, ask yourself what a perfectly wise and virtuous person would do when faced with the same problem or situation. The Stoics used the ideal of the wise person or sage in just this way. Think about someone you know personally or someone you know by reputation who comes closest to this ideal and take them as a model in your reflections. Third, ask yourself what strengths or resources nature has given you to deal with the situation. For example, do you have the capacity for patience and endurance? How might using those capacities help you deal with this problem more wisely? So, right now, I would say if I have one main problem, it's not having enough time and having made so many work commitments to so many different projects that are, I think, quite valuable, but take an awful lot to pull off successfully, that I'm feeling overwhelmed, a good portion of the day. And I found that Stoicism and Stoic mindfulness techniques can be quite helpful in dealing with that, in part because, on the one hand, I think that advice about, telling those things, look, you're just an impression, a fantasia in Stoic terms, an imagination, not the reality of things that you portray yourself to be. That is very powerful, and it gives you a distancing that's quite useful. That's talked about here in the handbook, and which is part of Stoic practice. On the other hand, the Stoics don't say just push it away, don't think about it, tell it it's nothing. You are supposed to come back to what you're thinking about, what you're feeling, and then examine it more closely later on when you have a little bit more calm, when you have the capacity to look at it more, we might say objectively. I would actually say more subjectively in a good way, because only the human subject can look into himself or herself and really see what's going on in the guts of the psyche. Although another, a trained individual can often be quite helpful in looking at what's going on with you and how you present, and suggesting what might be going on. So when it comes to being overwhelmed, some of the factors I just do not have control over are the amount of hours in a day, and to some degree the amount of energy that I have. Of course, if I screw around and putter and don't get things done, that's my choice. And if I fritter away my energy on useless pursuits, like, for example, watching a show, watching one show to relax, okay, that's great. Watching, binge watching, as they call it these days, not so great, and that tends to enervate you rather than energize you. Similarly, if I'm not even tempted to do this, but if I were to go out and say, I'm going to blow off some steam, I'm going to go to the bar and just get drunk, well, then if my work doesn't get done, I know exactly why that is. I have control over those elements. But I don't have control over whether the technology cooperates with me. I don't have control over, how the environment works for my filming. I've got lighting that I can use, but there's only so much that you can do about noise and about sound and things like that. I have control over how much effort I put in and whether I structure my time thoughtfully or whether I do things in a haphazard manner that's less likely to get things done. So, who would be somebody who I might look to? Well, I'm a big fan of Epictetus. I keep reading and rereading his discourses, but Aurelius, who is also very influenced by Epictetus, is also a great example as well, because he was a guy who really did not have enough hours in the day for the job that he was supposed to do. And when I think about, in comparison, trying to produce philosophy content, engage with people, do the consulting work that I do, get some academic writing done, get some popular writing done, hold events, start building a new client base out here. All those sorts of things really pale in comparison to running the Roman Empire during a time of crisis. Makes it, puts it in perspective. So, the third part, what strengths or resources have I been given to deal with the situation? Well, one of the strengths is indeed in the teachings of Stoicism. One of the teachings of Stoicism, it's a little self-referential, is you ought to have handy some of the teachings so that when something comes up, you're not left in the lurch or scrambling and trying to find, where's the book? You can say, this is what applies in this situation. This is what can help me make sense of it and not be so troubled or anxious or scatterbrained. So that's one strength. That's one resource. There's also internal strengths and resources. Um, Patience to let things sort themselves out over time. Let's call it diligence required to get things done in an orderly manner rather than trying to get them all done at once. Um, and prudence. Practical wisdom. Practical wisdom is one of those sorts of things that it's not as if you just simply have it and then you engage it. It's something that has to be built over time, and the more that you use it, the stronger it gets. So, every time that I make a choice about should I think about this prudently or should I just react, I'm deciding whether I want to have more capacity to do that in the future or perhaps less capacity or the same capacity. So, when I think about it that way, I end up feeling much less overwhelmed with all the stuff that I have on my to-do list. Today is day 4 of Stoic Week 2015, and the theme for today in the handbook is virtue. So there's an interesting virtue and values clarification exercise for the noonday reflection, and it runs like this. As a first move in this direction, here's 2 exercises that might help. First, use these questions to clarify your core values. What's ultimately the most important thing in life to you? What do you want your life to stand for or be about? What would you most like your life to be remembered for after you've died? What sort of thing do you want to spend your time doing? What sort of person do you want to be in your various relationships and roles in life, that is, as a parent, a friend, at work, or in life generally? And then it suggests you could also ask how far your core values match what the ancient Stoics meant by virtue, especially character traits such as wisdom, justice, courage, and moderation. And then it suggests, second, look at all your answers to the first set of questions and ask how far your real actions on a day-to-day basis match your core values. If they don't match completely, and it would be surprising if they did, think about ways in which you could bring the two closer together. Think of one specific activity you could be doing but aren't, which would help you develop towards expressing your core values or which would enable you to express them fully. So again, really great exercise. A lot to think about there. What's ultimately the most important thing in life to me? I think at an earlier stage, I would have said something like possessing wisdom, or something like having a great career in philosophy, writing important works that advance the discipline and deal with, if not necessarily resolve, problems that have longstanding been puzzles for philosophers. But if I had to put it in a word now, I would say persons. I've come to realize as time has gone on, I'm at the midway point in my life, and I've met a lot of people and interacted with quite a few, many good, many bad, and I have had children who are quite a responsibility. I've taught a lot of students, and I've had a lot of people in my life exit this life at one point or another. And so I've become more and more conscious of things that I was missing out on in the past, namely how important it is to attend to and to appreciate the people that we have, and to engage in good relationships with them. And that requires, quite a bit on our part, especially in the society that we live in today with a million different distractions and frustrations, and, we're scattered in all different ways. It's easy to start, losing track of what really matters. I could answer some of these other questions, but I don't want this to get too long. I don't know what I would want my life to be remembered for after I've died. Again, I wanted to leave behind a legacy in earlier years, but as I did more and more work in philosophy, I think I've come to the point where I'm not very worried about my own legacy, and I'm more interested in helping to carry on and initiate people into a long-standing tradition in which a lot of the heavy lifting has been done by other philosophers before me, including some of the present. Great thinkers like, say, Alasdair MacIntyre, who are still around. There've been great thinkers down through the ages, and I could spend my time trying to do my own thing, and probably not do it all that well, or I could spend my time really learning what Plato has to say, really learning what Descartes has to say, really learning what Hegel has to say, and then helping other people to grasp that as well. So I think I'm not sure that my life is going to get a Wikipedia entry, and maybe it doesn't need it, but I would like to have left behind a lot of students and a lot of friends and family upon whom I've made some sort of positive impact, not so much just on my own part, but by introducing them to the great things that I value, including Stoicism. What sort of person do you most want to be in your various relationships and roles in life, as a parent, friend, at work, or in life generally? Well, that's an easy one. Quite a bit different than I still am. I would like to be a much more patient person, a much more generous person, a much more just person, in the sense of not only doing the right thing, which is what I tend to do, but actually not having to force myself to do what I recognize to be the right thing, because it becomes part of my nature. That's something I have to work quite a bit towards. So if I look at my answers to this first set of questions and I ask how my real actions on a day-to-day basis match this, how can I bring these closer together? Well, clearly I need to do some more intensive exercise when it comes to some of the areas in which I haven't developed the virtues like I would wish to. And I also need to start setting time aside to, spend less time focused on all the minutia of career stuff. When you're in the position I am, where much of it is me doing it on my own, or with fairly minimal support from institutions, I get tied up in that sort of thing, and it takes a lot of my attention away, both from the philosophical texts and thinkers that I would love to be able to spend a lot more time with, and with the people who I am helping to communicate about this stuff to, whether through YouTube or in my speaking and face-to-face teaching, in my online classes, in my philosophical counseling, all these sorts of things. I would like to be the kind of person who is entirely available, to use a Marcellian word, to the other person. So yeah, I've got to do some work. What would be a specific activity? That's where it gets to the nitty-gritty, isn't it? I think that one of the things I need to do is what the Stoics counseled, which is have ready at hand some dogmata, that is, some sayings, some sayings that express core teachings or core values about the sort of things that I value, so I can remind myself once I start to become impatient with somebody and finishing their sentences and not waiting till they actually have to say what they have to say, or any of those other sort of things. I can remind myself that they are another self, and that I ought to be valuing them and that would be, a great expression of what it is that I'm supposed to be about. Today is day 5 of Stoic Week, or rather, tonight is day 5 of Stoic Week still. You can tell by looking out the window that it's now rather dark because it's evening. It's around 6 o'clock at night, so it's taken me this long to get to the noontime meditation for the day, in part because I had a lot of stuff going on that had to be attended to today, and my energy was a bit low. We had a great Stoic Week event last night. I'm going to be putting video about that. Well, by the time that you're seeing this, I've already put that video out, so no need for me to tell you about it. But it was well attended. We had some good discussions, and I'm quite happy with it as something that was put together fairly, fairly last minute in a new city. Going up against, as it turned out, the competition of a speaker crawl that the library was having. So I had a lot of opportunity to practice some of the, Stoic dogmata, the things that you tell yourself to try to put yourself in the proper frame of mind when you find that you're encountering difficulties or emotions that are troubling. I was worried that nobody was going to show up, for one thing, but it turned out to be a great time. So let me get to the exercise for today. What they suggest is an exercise based on the circles of Heracles, who is another Stoic philosopher whose works, unfortunately, we don't have very much of. So Heracles suggested we should think of ourselves as living in a series of concentric circles, and that we should try to draw the circles somehow toward the center. He explained that the right point will be reached if, through our own initiative, we reduce the distance of the relationship with each person. He also suggests using verbal techniques such as calling one's cousin's brother and one's uncles or aunts father or mother. And we could extend this further, as they do in the Stoic Handbook, to our neighbors, to co-workers, to our fellow citizens, even the rest of the people in the world, thinking of them as being closer to us in relation. Because remember, for the Stoics, as Epictetus says, duties are universally measured by relationships. So if I think of myself just as a sibling, or just as a cousin, or just as a coworker, I may leave a lot of people out. And so there's two things. We should not only be thinking about those closer, more immediate relations that we encounter much of the time, or that are really formative for us or central in our lives, but we should try to extend our matrix of relations out to consider everybody as much as possible. And then, like Heracles suggests, try to pull them in, try to give those people who really don't have any sort of, justice-based claim on a different kind of status. We give it to them. Remember, that as I said with Cicero, one of the things that he was impressed by with the Stoics in his On Duties is the fact that beneficence is a part of justice, going beyond just the rules to do more, to be generous, to be kind, in this case, to be affectionate, to feel a sense of compassion or affection towards other people. So I always try to, talk a little bit about how this plays out in my life. I guess that, where this would come up for me, where I could really start applying this more consistently, I have a lot of interactions, if I want to have them, with people from all over the world because of my YouTube presence, and also to a lesser extent Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Google+. I'm all over the net. And I have people email me every once in a while just out of the blue and say, hey, do you ever think of this? Or I'd like to pitch an idea to you. Sometimes I even have people who want my advice on things. And I do sometimes give free free sessions, which normally I would be charging for, but I give them free to people who are trying to do the sort of things that I'm doing, with producing content that is connected with the intellectual life or the humanities, and they want to put it up on YouTube or do something like that. So what I have to do if I'm going to follow this is be much more consistent, which I, admit I haven't been, in treating everybody, you might say, affectionately, trying to look at the good side of what it is that they're doing. Even, I get a lot of emails and queries sort of pestering me, asking me to do this or to that for them. Can you do a video on this? Just why don't you drop your whole production schedule and create this video for me for free? Well, one way I could look at that is, instead of saying, why don't you, think about what you're asking here? I could say, it's really nice that they have that sort of zeal for learning, that sort of impulse, and that they're willing to email or message some person out of the blue and say, hey, I would like to learn about this. Do you think you could help me out with that? So that would be, really in accordance with the advice that was given a little bit earlier in the meditation for the day, which is that Marcus would talk about looking at each of the people and trying to see their best traits, trying to see how they actually do participate in something that's valuable, rather than doing what's a lot easier for us, I think, in our society, which is to look at the negative. So a lot for me to think about and mull over. I can't say that this is one of those times where I can point towards a lot of progress on my part, unfortunately. But, that means that I have some work to do. It's day 6 of Stoic Week, and the theme in the handbook for the day is resilience. So what they provide you with in the handbook today is a contemplative exercise, or that's what it would have been called in ancient times, from theoria, contemplation, an active way of using one's mind. Nowadays, we would more call that visualization or mindfulness, because we have other jargon that we like to use. And it's an interesting way to do things. It's one that I have myself started to incorporate into my life, starting with Stoic Week last year, and in part because there is always fodder for doing this sort of thing, because there's always potential crises looming, at least in my life and in the life of people around me. So it suggests that what you should do is visualize a situation. You begin with something that's traumatic. You imagine the worst case scenario, and you observe your emotions. You start thinking about your reasons for feeling those emotions and the thoughts that accompany them. And then you can start to, you might say, deconstruct them to determine whether they really are rational or whether they're only semi-rational, and you probably should, start to push them away. And the way that you push them away is by revealing to yourself that these are not very true and productive ways of thinking about things. When you do that, you will probably feel a sense of anxiety, in part because we often tend to push away any sort of thinking about stuff that bothers us. And I will say that this is an exercise that I've been doing in its proper way for about a year, and I've been doing it in ways that are very unproductive pretty much the whole of my life. I'm a worrier. I'm the kind of person who does think about, well, what could go wrong? That's part of what makes me a really great analyst when it comes to, say, curriculum design or putting together a proposal. I'm the one who sees, well, there's a crack there that might need to be filled, because you never know what's going to come through it. So I'm the guy for that, but then that bears certain consequences for my own life. What could go wrong here? What could go wrong there? And one of the things that you want to be able to do is think about what sort of resources you would have to deal with the situation. And if you think about this in terms of Stoic philosophy, the resources that we want to bring to the fore are the virtues or these capacities for choosing the right thing. We can remind ourselves that we actually are free as far as our faculty of choice goes, and we can decide, we can determine to a certain extent how we think and how we feel about stuff. We're not just stuck with it the way that our thoughts and feelings often tell us that we are. A lot of the time when we're worrying and we're sort of planning and problem solving, we think about external goods, or what for the Stoics are actually indifference for the most part: property, wealth, relationships, those sorts of things. We think about those as what is going to protect us from this terrible thing that could happen. But those are rather like dams that can easily burst and be flooded over, compared to what the Stoics call your faculty of choice, your proairesis, your ruling principle, provided it's properly developed. So this is a really great exercise to engage in. I recently did this myself in terms of a theme that I've talked about a few times already here, about just how much work is actually on my plate and whether I can truly get everything done well, satisfy the commitments that I've made to various people. I'm working a lot these days in order to do that, but my fear is, even with that, no matter how much I work, maybe I won't be able to get things done, or I won't be able to get things done the way that I want them to, with the quality, or perhaps the client or the viewer is not going to be as happy about them. But again, it helps me to remind myself that a lot of this I don't really have much control over. I have control over how well I do the work and whether I do the work, and if I make the time to do the work rather than frittering it away with other things, which is quite possible. Those things lie within my sphere of choice. Other things are really outside of it. And when I do that, I do in fact notice a lessening of anxiety. I can't say that I managed to dispel it entirely. As far as that sort of thing goes, I've got a lot of work to do. If I'm going to ever be a Stoic, I have a lot. The road is very long for me, but it's a great exercise, and I'm glad that they reminded us of it and gave some nice structured ways to apply it. It's day 7 of Stoic Week 2015, so things are coming to a close, bringing an end to the entire Stoic Week again, and then thinking about where we're going to go from here. The last of the meditations or reflections has to do with nature and the Stoic view on not just the natural world as we think about it, but really the whole, the totality, the cosmos and everything in it. And as he explains here, Marcus, being a essentially orthodox Stoic, understood the universe to have a rationality pervading it that we human beings ourselves could align ourselves with. It's a little bit different than, say, Judeo-Christian conception of this, or even a deist conception, where there's some sort of deity who's not the world who gets things started. And instead, it's the world itself that really is the divine. And what they suggest in the handbook doing this time around is listening to the meditation, A View from Above, which is really great. I've used it a number of times myself. I like it as an exercise. Started using it last year when I downloaded it for the first time. And what he's got here in the handbook is, here's a passage from Marcus that expresses vividly the theme of adopting a view from above, from a cosmic standpoint. Marcus's main focus here is on standing back from your normal perspective and seeing the relative smallness and transience of human life. But elsewhere, he also stresses the positive ethical dimension of viewing yourself as part of nature, or rather part of an organized cosmos. A fine reflection from Plato. One who would converse about human beings should look on all things earthly as though from some point far above, upon herds, armies, and agriculture, marriages and divorces, births and deaths, the clamor of law courts, deserted wastes, alien peoples of every kind, festivals, lamentations, and markets, this intermixture of everything, an ordered combination of opposites. So, to bring these reflections myself to a close, when I do take this sort of point of view, I find it extremely helpful because it puts things into a different perspective. Much of the time, in large part because we need to be this way in order to function well, we focus on what's before us. We focus on a very me-centric perspective. And that's needed because nobody else is going to do my work for me. Nobody else is going to attend to situations and figure out what exactly in them I can bring to bear, unless I'm under somebody else's tutelage, which I'm not. I haven't been for a long time, and I'm running my own business and carrying on all these sorts of endeavors. So I have to be rather self-motivated. But it's very useful to be able to stand back from that and think about the larger perspective. That I find that helps me not only to deal with some of the stresses and anxieties of the enterprises in which I'm engaged in, and some of the interactions with other people that I deal with. It's also useful for me getting a stronger sense out of what I can do for other people, what I can bring to bear, and how I ought to behave towards them. If I see things in the larger perspective, I might not just see how people are connected with me, but see how they're connected with each other and with the larger world. So, a great Stoic week. I had a very enjoyable time doing the event and putting together the Cicero videos, doing these daily meditations. I was not as active in the class as I have been in the last year, but hopefully some of the other stuff I did, makes up for that virtual absence. In any case, it's been a really great Stoic week, a lot to think about and a lot to build on. So my thanks again to all of the people involved over there at the University of Exeter in organizing this, for putting together the blog years ago and continuing it, for making sure that this event occurs every year and just keeping the whole thing going. It's really a great experience. I would love to see this happen for other philosophical schools as well, but the fact that it's happening for Stoicism, I think, probably says something about that philosophical school. So on that, I will end.